Hi guys, welcome to this session on Microsoft Visio. In this module, I want to show you some of the basic concepts when you get started with Visio. So I'm on the home screen and I'm going to select a basic diagram to start off with. Just create that, and what you'll get now is a basic diagram with some stencils. Down the left hand side you get stencils. So in this particular diagram you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stencils. Now each stencil has a different set of shapes. As you can see down there, as I click on these, different shapes, and the top one was basic shapes. So depending on which diagram you pick will depend on how many stencils you'll get for that diagram. You can also add additional stencils through this option, more shapes, where you can go, for example, to business. There's stencils there for that diagram, quite a lot of ones in business process, marketing diagrams, charting, pivot diagram, etc, etc. Now general, you've got blocks. Now I haven't got blocks on this, so I'll click on that and just show you how you can bring another stencil in if required. So that'll drop the block stencil in. So I've now got an additional stencil. You can also create your own stencil. If I go to more shapes again and create open stencil, so I've already created some, but I'll do a new one in a second. So open, this will list all the stencils that I've got, and I'll pick process shapes. So I'm after projects, that one. So this is one where I've actually drawn these shapes because they don't exist in Visio, so I created them. So I'd made that one and then I just added it into this stencil like so. Open it up and then you can just rename it whatever you want, and then you can have a stencil with just your favorite shapes in. If I want to bring a shape from a stencil that already exists, say a circle, if I just hover that over there, my stencil opens and I can drop that one in there. If I go back to this one, say like I want a division sign into my stencil, hover over it, let go, and it just drops it in, and then you save your stencil like so. Now to close it, if I just right click on that and close this stencil and create a new one from scratch, it's just simply File, New, Metric or US, and then you've got a blank one which you can then do the same sort of things to, just bring things in, drop them in. Or if you've got them on the screen already, if I just go up to the basic shapes, let's say I've got this cross on the screen already and I want that to go into my stencil, I can just drag that into my stencil. Now it asks you for a name, so I'll call it cross because that's what it was. So if you bring it from, drag it down like I did initially, so I'll just do that again. So I'll bring the plus sign in. It remains, it keeps the name, but if you bring it off the diagram you have to rename it. So I've just got 3 items there. I'll just save that stencil and I'll call that tests. Probably got one called test already, and then that's there for future use, and then you can just close that down if you don't want it anymore. Now you can have many stencils, and you can have these stencils saved as a template, so every time you open the template, the stencils, your set is there, and it makes things easier rather than having to look through all these preset ones for a particular shape. You can have them set in your own little stencil. However, having said that, you do have a search facility at the top there. If I type car in there, that will search through all the templates and find cars. So I could, for example, bring this car shape on there, make it bigger, and then add that to my stencil if I so wish. I don't want to do that, so I'll delete that, but that's what you can do. You can just search for shapes and then add them to your stencil. Now you'll notice that all the stencils have disappeared while this search box is on, so you have to physically close that off to get back to your set of stencils. I'm going back onto basic shapes. So stencils are a foundational part of Visio. You can't really do anything without a stencil, so you will get stencils or you'll get used to using them. So that's that bit. Now next I want to talk about this area on the ribbon. So I'm on the home tab and I'm looking at the tools area. These 6 items here, I want to quickly go through what these are all about. And to do that, I'm just going to bring two squares on. Now, when you bring a square on, it is a square and it always will be a square. Unlike Word and Excel, when you reshape things, it changes to a rectangle. This is a square. If you wanted a rectangle, you bring a rectangle shape on and it maintains a rectangle shape. Whereas this, no matter what I try and do to this, will always be a square. It's just reducing in size. So I'll just get rid of that for a minute. Now, there are two types of connector. So the pointer tool is what this white arrow is. That's on by default. But when you click on connector, it allows you to make a connection between shapes. Now, the two types of connection is point to point. So that's a point there. Look, you see a little green square to another point. Now, this stays on until you click it off, which is quite off-putting when you first get into Visio. You have to physically click back onto the pointer tool, otherwise you'll be doing lines everywhere. So what does point to point mean? Point to point means that no matter where I move this shape to, it will always be from that point to that point. It'll just wrap around a different way, but it'll always be those 2 points, point to point. If I delete that line and do the other connection, which is shape to shape, so at this time I'm just hovering over the shape, the whole shape goes green, and then I'm hovering over that shape and it says glue to shape, so the whole shape's gone green. So I haven't actually sat it on one of these connection points. Knock the connector tool off, back onto the pointer. What's going to happen now is shape to shape will snap to the closest connection point when you move this around. So that's the difference between the two, really. One stays on the point, the one stays on the shape. Shape to shape, point to point. Now, every shape that you bring onto the screen has a text box already in it. As soon as you start typing, it sits in the middle like that. Now, this area, paragraph, gives you the options to move the text around. It's called a text block, and you can put bullet lists on if you want. And if I just double click on that and just press enter, type test again, you can see it's doing a bullet list. Now, there are other features in this paragraph group. If I click on paragraph, you've got this text area. So you don't need to come in here if you're just going to do this. So this is alignment. You've got font styles. You've got them there as well, so you don't really need to come into this for this. Character spacing, same as what you've got in Word, you can use that. Paragraph have just been on, and you see you've got indentation options. Text block, I've already moved the alignment to the top. And then tabs, we just had a quick look at bullets. There's bullets, you've got different options, different types of bullets. If you didn't want that one, you could pick that, for example. But tabs, the default is 15 millimeters. So if I put a tab at 50 millimeters, so you can see what that does, and then just click OK. So what will happen now is if I just double click into that, press enter, tab, that's jumped across. I'll just type test again, and then tab again, test again. It just jumps across whatever you've set it as. Backspace those off. Now the text itself is a text box. Below the connector tool, you've got this option to do a text box. If I click on that and draw a text box like you would in Word, type test again, click on the pointer tool. There's no point doing this if you're then going to go and start colouring it in. If I fill that in and do all the other sort of things that you can do with these boxes, bevel and stuff like that. So these are all standard Office features. Change the font to black so you can see it a little bit. So what I've basically created now is a rectangle. So if I was just going to do that, I just needed to bring a rectangle on, elongate that, and do exactly the same using these effects or whatever I want to do. Type test on that. That's gone white. White's good actually. White's better than black. Now, where this comes in, where you would just do a text box, is if you wanted just to be like this, plain text, nothing else. That's all you want, and it just sits like that as a box. Otherwise, if you're going to colour it in or put lines around it, you may as well use one of these shapes because they've all got a text box on them anyhow. Now let's get rid of some of this stuff. delete that one off, delete that one off, delete that one off. Now you've got this tool on the right. I'll come back to these two. You've got this tool here which is text block. What does that do? Well, that can offset the text box that's on top of this like this. If I click this, hover over that, and then I can just move that off, slightly offset. Now the font's gone a bit pear-shaped because I can't see it's white. So that's now offset slightly. If I click back on the pointer tool, when I move this shape, the text still comes with it. No matter what I do, the text will always be with it. So sometimes boxes are on top of each other, slightly sitting over, and you can't see the text, so you might want to do that. That is using the text block tool. Now this next two buttons I want to look at is the drawing shapes, which are basically rectangles without any connections on. So if I just click on this and then get my pointer tool, click back on that, and then that. If I click on connector, there's the connections. There are none. None. So if you're going to use this, I've used this in the past for when I wanted to do a cabinet, a cupboard, or a bookcase and things like that. It's alright to use it like that. You're just measuring the shape and doing whatever you want. You don't want really to use these preset ones, and you want to add your own connections. I'll just get rid of that. So if I just copy this shape, now there is a key command to copy, Control C, and then Control V, or you can do Control D, which is duplicate, just as a duplicate shape. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add my own connection points onto these two, and that's what this little tool is for. If I click on that and then hold my Control key down, I can physically put some connections on there. And then I need to click onto this shape, hold my Control key down, and do the same on there. And then what you should be able to do is move from one connection to the other one. That's to shape, that's to point. I want it to go to point, point to point, point, not to shape, to point. Click on the pointer tool, have a look, so you've got that. Now I could do the same sort of thing on these pre-formatted ones. I can just click the cross, hold the Control key down, and give myself a couple of extra connection points, and then I can use those points to connect in to these points, like so. So there's quite a few times when you need more than the just default connection points, so that's quite a common thing that you would do. Now if I get rid of all of that and draw myself a rectangle again, there are different types of connections. So I'll just do Control D again and push these apart. So I'll do the same thing again, but I'm just going to do one connection point. So Control key down, click on that one, or click on this one to start off with, and then activate that one, Control key down, click. Right, what I want to do is I want to glue these two shapes together. So if I push those together, nothing's happening, they're not gluing together. Even though I've got connection points, if I click on that cross and the connector, you can see the connection point there, but they are not. This is not gluing together, and I want to glue them together. Now what you have to do is, if I put the cross on, you see the little connection points. I'm going to try to right click, and I did first time, which is great for me. The default is inward. Both of these are inward connections. If you think of a magnet that's got the same polarity, when you try and push them together, they push away. That's what's happening here. If you want them to glue, and you've created these connections, you need to put them both to inward, outward. Well, you only need to do one actually, but there we go. So now let's see what happens if I push these together. I should get a point where it'll sit. If I can hit them. Still not letting me do it. Click on that one. Is that connected? Let's come down. There we go. You see that's now glued. There should now be a pair, and they should move together like that. So I've glued them together using the connection points. I can still pull them apart if I pull the top one apart, but when I get them back together, once they are glued, I'll have to glue them, do it the other way, that way. they'll stay like that, so that you move them together. So that's you creating your own connection points and then gluing things together, because otherwise you can have things overlapping a little bit. If I just show you that one, if I bring, you try to push these two together, now they're side by side, but if I do a rectangle where there's no, just do Control D again, where there's no connection points, so that's Visio's actually snapped that on, but sometimes you get it like that and it looks okay, but obviously that one is shorter than this one. If you do the connection points like that, they will always be the same length and you won't overlap. And you know, if you've done measurements and things like that, that's what you want to look at. So just get rid of these ones and move these into the middle. When you're doing floor plans and things like that, which I'll do later on, you can sometimes, or you need to sometimes, layer shapes and lock the layers. For example, if you're doing a wall and you're putting plug sockets onto the wall, you don't want to move the wall accidentally and knock all the sockets out, so you can layer that, create a layer and then lock it, so then it won't move. So that's what I want to do on this one. So I'm just going to highlight those two. These are the layers over here, so you've got two options, assign to layer and layer properties. So assign to layer, there isn't, well, there's only connect to layer, but I'll go new, I'll call it Steve. So I've created a new layer, OK, and then I go into layer properties, and in layer properties I can lock it so these two shapes will not be moved. So I cannot move them, they're in position. Then you can just add other shapes onto them, change the colour so they stand out, but whatever, this is the only thing that's moving at the moment. If I do a Control D to duplicate that one, and then let's have a look at positioning that, let's rotate that one, yep, flip vertical and just stick it on top like so. So that's an amazing diagram, as I'm sure you will all agree, but the thing underneath is locked in position. You could then create a second layer and lock these in position and so on, and then you're building up your diagram. So layers is a great tool if you're doing multiple things. Furniture, for example, positioning furniture in a room and then accidentally moving the room shape, all the furniture is out of sync. So you would lock that down and then start adding additional stuff. So that's layers. Now let's get rid of that. To get rid of it, I have to unlock it, so go back into layer properties, unlock it, and then I should be able to move it around, which I can. Now there's another tool you've got. If I go on to design, you've got all these different design themes, if you like, different colour themes. Now I've coloured that manually red, so that's why it's staying like that. Lots and lots of themes, like so. Quite like that one actually, that colour. So when I bring a shape on, if you notice there, look, all the shapes now are this colour. If I change to a different one, they're all that colour, so that's just changing the theme. Now you've got backgrounds and titles. I'll go for titles first off. What this will do is put titles on the back, whichever one I pick. I'll pick this one, it's just a simple one. And I'll go to click on the title and I can't actually click on anything, because what's happening here, this is called a background page, and if you notice down the bottom there, this is page 1 where I am, where I can move things around. The background page has been added like this, so if I want to type in there, I have to go onto the background page and then it will be changed. The same will apply if I do a background, and I will pick the world. Everybody likes the world, that's the background. So if I go into this now, click on that, I can colour that one in red so it just stands out a little bit, so fill red, pink background onto the front page, and then you can see everything like that. Now if I delete this background page and do this all manually so you can see how it works, so get rid of all that, back to square one, just add a blank page. Now I want this page to be my logo page, so I've got a page 2, and I'm going to insert a logo which is just going to be a rectangle, and I'll just put "It's Easy Training" on that. That can be the logo, pretending, and then you just position that where you want it to be. So let's say this is your branding, and that's what you want to be on every single page. What you have to do is go into page setup to tell Visio that this is a background page, and then go into page setup on the first page and say you want this page to look at that background. So I'm just going to double click and call this logo, so it's got a name, spell it right, logo, and page 1 just can be main. I'll just call that main. You don't have to name the pages, but there we go, I have done. So right clicking on that, go into page setup. You can also go into page setup from design. So at the moment it's a foreground page called logo. Well, I want it to be a background page, so I'll just set that to background, and then it hasn't got a background itself. I'll click OK to that, and then on the main page go page setup. It's a foreground page, which is correct, background none, select logo, and then that will pull that logo through onto this page, and it will be like so. And if you did that for every page would be looking at logo, and then you've got your branding coming through. Be careful with branding. If you've got too much information or too much text, it can intrude on the diagram that you're using. For example, a flowchart or a cross-functional flowchart. It can get in the way. But that's basically how you do that. Now, the last thing in this little session I want to look at is on the design tab again. You have got options to go into page setup, which is where we just were, and you can see that there's quite a lot of information in here: paper size, print setup, page size, drawing scales, page properties where we were, layout, how you want things to sit, and alt text if you want alt text. So that's all that information in page setup. Go to the insert tab. You've got all these normal things. I'll go through some of these later on, but I want to quickly look at containers because they're quite useful. If I click a container, what you can do is you can put shapes or sets of shapes inside a container. So I'll pick this one. So that's a container, this with the title on. So if I put this rectangle in there, it will engage with that and that rectangle. Slightly gets it bigger, and then that like so. And then these are, I'll stick these in there. Make this a bit bigger. Okay, so you've got some shapes in the, I'll split them apart actually. You've got some shapes in here. Now once you've got your, I'll just give it a heading. Everything's going to be test today. Test. Now if I move this around as it is at the minute, it's all going around, great, everything's coming with me. So it's a container, what it says on the tin, a container. At the minute, as it is set at the minute, I can add extra shapes into there, and it will accommodate those shapes, and then I can move them around as a group like so. If I want to lock this container to stop any other shapes being added, you've got this option on the top, lock container. Now if I try and put something in there and move this off, it leaves that behind. It becomes an orphan. It's not part of this container group. If it should have been part of this container group, you need to obviously take the lock off, push it in, and then lock it again, and then it will be part of this container group. So that's containers. So what we've covered there is the basic concepts. So if we go back to the Home tab, we've looked at these tools: the pointer tool, the drawing shapes, connector, connection points, text block, and doing a text box. We've looked at creating our own stencil and adding stencils in through more shapes, opening stencil, and then basically bringing it in, whatever stencil you've called it. And we've looked at searching. We've looked at containers, background pages, using the backgrounds under design, and titles, and then we've just looked at containers lastly there. We've also looked at layering shapes, so you can lock shapes down. That will become more apparent at a later date when we do diagrams where drawing plans etc. are needed. There's that stencil of mine. Now most of these stencils here that I've got in this one, just as an aside, I think I've drawn them. It's tiny. one thing you've got to bear in mind when you do a stencil is the scale of that drawing that you're doing it on. Does it match this one? This is a default blank stencil or diagram, so some of these are quite small. This is for a engineering diagram, I think, so these are very small, so they don't really fit on this. You can make them bigger like I'm doing there, but you can see how tiny they are. But if I brought these in on that particular diagram, you would see how they would work. I don't know what I've done to that one, I've totally killed it. Anyhow, I won't mess about anymore. So that's the end of this little bit. So thank you for your time on this one, and I'll see you on the next little session which is following on.